Nicaragua, a little country with big hopes. It is a little country about the size of Alabama. Abra and I traveled to Nicaragua from the middle of October to the middle of November last year to coincide with the presidential and legislative elections on November 6th. We had also been down 3.5 years previously. Abra's brother and sister and I drove down to Nicaragua, and I had previously been there in 1988 and 1990. In 1990, I was an official electoral observer. I took a delegation of 6 people down to observe the election in 1990.
How many people are there?
In Nicaragua, there are about 6 million people.
Wow.
And I'll try to give you a little more demographics and stuff here. Just to get us located, here's North America. Nicaragua is this little green bit down here. To locate us in the Latin American Caribbean region, Nicaragua is right here. Here's South America, Mexico, United States. And this is Central America. The yellow country here is Nicaragua. As I said, it's about the size of Alabama. 6 million people. Pacific Ocean on the west, Caribbean on the east. They call it the Atlantic. It's dominated by 2 large lakes. Lake Nicaragua, also called Colchibocco, and Lake Managua, the smaller lake there. Costa Rica to the south, Honduras to the north. This is the political division of the country. It's divided into what they call departamentos, roughly equivalent to our states. There are 15 departamentos and 2 autonomous regions. The North Autonomous Region, which is largely populated by indigenous groups, particularly the Mosquito Indians. The South Autonomous also has some indigenous peoples, but also English-speaking blacks who are descendants of slaves from English colonies. And also Spanish-speaking people have moved in also. We traveled passed through 11 of the departamentos and the South Autonomous Atlantic region. The west here is dominated by a string of volcanoes. Right down, you see the island of Ometepe, which will show you during the presentation. There's 2 volcanoes there, another down here, go right through there. So we have fertile volcanic plains. This is most of the population. Probably, I think around 90% of the population lives in the west. Over here, we've got more forested and swampy coastal areas. Now, as I said, it's divided into departamentos, roughly equivalent to our states. Each state is divided into what we call municipios. They call municipios, municipalities, which is really more like a county. So this is the Departamento of Esteli, which is where we based our operations. To go back, it's right here. We have friends there, and we stay in their home when we're there. Esteli is divided into 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 municipios. Here's the city of Esteli. This is the municipio of Esteli, and these are the other municipios here. Now, for the whole country, roughly like a county, really. The municipal government is the government of the main town and the surrounding territories. So it's kind of like a county with one government for both the urban areas and the rural areas. We have 6 here in Esteli out of the whole country with the 15 departamentos and the 2 autonomous regions. There's 153 municipios. And that was that was all about. Okay, here's just another map of the country so we can orient you and show you where we travel. So we stay with our friend. We flew into Managua, the capital city right there by Lake Managua. And a friend of ours met us at the airport. We rented a car and we drove to Esteli. Got there in the night for a long, tiring drive. It was in the middle of torrential rains, flooding, people displaced by their homes. We did run into a little bit of problem with some roads that had been flooded a bit, and there was some work going on. So we stayed in Esteli with our friends, and then after a while we left and traveled down south of the capital city to Masaya, the area of Masaya here, a little town called San Juan de Oriente, and we used that as a base, stayed in the home of a friend down there, and used that as a base to explore the southern part of the country, down near the southwest, which I'd never been, out to the island of Ometepe. And after spending about a week there, we traveled up the west coast and went up to the city of Leon, which is the second largest city in the country, and up to Chinandega, and right out here to the extreme northwest, and visited the Pacific up here. But we were basically traveling to Leon, where we met with a woman who was involved in training people to work in the polls on election day, so we could learn about the election laws and the procedure. Then, on the eve of the national elections, we drove back to Esteli, and were able to witness the elections there in Esteli. And after the election, stayed for a few days for the birthday, 69th birthday party of our host. And then we drove down the center part of the country, down here to the Departamento of Chontales, where I have a lot of experience out in this little town out in the mountains called San Domingo. My wife and I helped start the Sister City program there with Tucson, Arizona, back in 1988. We went out there and our group did work on the water system and such. And the kids and I went there 4 years ago. So we spent a couple of days in San Domingo, came down, drove to the end of the highway at the city of El Rama on the Escondido River, Rio Escondido. Then we took a power panga, a power passenger boat, real quick, over here to the city of Bluefields, where we got on a ship and went out to Corn Island out here in the Caribbean, which is part of Nicaragua. Stayed there for a couple of days, came back, this time we took a direct boat all the way across right up the river to Rama, and then drove back to Managua and flew out of the country. So we, as I said, we were there for a month. This is the national hero of the country, Augusto Sandino. We were lucky enough to visit his hometown. Sorry for that difficulty, I don't know why it's doing that. When Sandino was a boy, there was a Nicaraguan who was fighting against the U.S. Marine occupation. I'm going to go a little back into the history. In the 1850s, there was people called filibusters, Americans that went to Central America to try to gain power and influence there. An American named William Walker went to Nicaragua in the early 1850s, basically declared himself the ruler, legalized slavery, etc. A few years later, a joint Central American army defeated him in the Battle of San Jacinto, and that was kind of the beginning of pushing the filibusters out of Nicaragua. But North Americans have always been interested, involved, and manipulating and invading Nicaragua throughout their history. During the 1850s, one of the wealthy American people at the time had a business going where they would bring people up the San Juan River in the southern part of Nicaragua and transport them across Lake Nicaragua, and then a short distance by coach over to the Pacific coast, so they could go up to San Francisco as part of the movement on the gold rush, right? It was much shorter than going down around the tip of South America, much easier than going overland through the United States. So then eventually, depending on how you count it, the U.S. has invaded Nicaragua 6 or 7 times. Starting in 1912, the U.S. Marines occupied the country for almost 20 years. They did withdraw briefly and come back, which they dominated. I knew a man named Bill Gandol, and I knew he was an old man. He had been a Marine in Nicaragua when he was 19 years old. He said, we were like kings down there. We raped, we murdered, we stole. He himself was in charge. There was an election, quote, election, unquote, in Managua. He was charged with running the election in a certain district of Managua. his commanding officer gave him the order of who was supposed to win the election. When they counted the votes, he simply switched the totals and made the loser the winner, and vice versa. Took the ballots, put them in a rowboat, rowed them out into the middle of Lake Nicaragua, and dumped the ballots into the lake. So anyways, during this 20 years, almost 20 years of occupation, this man led a resistance, Augusto Sandino. Now he was inspired. When he was a boy, there was another Nicaraguan who was fighting against the Marines called Benjamin Celedon, and the Marines killed him and paraded his body through the streets. As a child, Augusto Sandino witnessed this, and it's felt that his sense of humiliation of a foreign power occupying his country and doing things like that led him to become a resistance leader himself. Although his father was a prosperous man, he himself was a working man. He'd gone and worked in the oil fields in Mexico and in other places. And when he came back to Nicaragua, he began leading this resistance. It's another picture of Sandino. You see his image all over the country. His hat is a very famous symbol. This is part of his peasant army. No one knows to this day whether there were several hundred, several thousand, but at this time they were famous around the world for a relatively successful resistance to an imperial occupation of their country. This is his hometown of Niquinomo. We were lucky enough to go visit the little statue of him. So after the Marines withdrew, they left in charge a man named Anastasio Somoza, who had been the head of the National Guard. There was a president, but there was peace talks between Sandino and the conservative government, and when he was leaving the talks at one time, he was kidnapped by the National Guard and he was assassinated. And pretty soon afterward, the head of the National Guard, Anastasio Somoza, made himself dictator, and he or his sons were dictators until 1979. After Sandino's assassination, it was kind of a demoralized period. The resistance to the dictatorship was always there. It was scattered. It wasn't very effective. It kind of picked up in the mid to late 50s. In 1956, the dictator was assassinated by a man named
Rigoberto Lopez Perez.
He was immediately killed. The dictator died, and one of his sons took over. But it was considered to kind of be the beginning of the process to get rid of the dictatorship. And in 1959, the Cuban Revolution was an inspiration to the Nicaraguans. And in the late 50s, early 60s, the armed struggle against the dictatorship really started to pick up. In 1962, the Frente Sandinista de Liberación Nacional, the Sandinista National Liberation Front, was formed, with the major person being Carlos Fonseca, also Tomas Borge, Silvio Mayorga. Carlos Fonseca was subsequently killed in battle. Tomas Borge died just a couple of months ago. He was a great hero to the Nicaraguan people. I read the transcript of his 80th birthday party a couple of years ago, and he said, "This is a great honor." He said, "The greatest honor in my life was when I was captured by the National Guard during the Revolution, and Carlos Fonseca, the leader of the Sandinistas, said to all of the people, the Sandinistas that were hiding in their safe houses, the revolutionaries, he said to them, 'Stay where you are, don't move.' Tomas will not say a word. He was severely tortured and never gave out any information. So he was a great hero of the revolution, and there were many others. Here's Abra standing in front of one of the National Guard tanks that was used during the revolution. Another view of that. Here's another hero of the revolution, Julio Buitraga. He was a leader of the Sandinista party. The National Guard discovered his safe house where he was hiding, and they sent a force of 400 soldiers with artillery and air cover after one man. He held them off for 3 hours, but eventually, of course, they killed him. But another hero and martyr of the revolution. Finally, in July 19, 1979, after a brutal, horrible war that lasted, as we said, the Sandinista Party was formed in 1962. Finally, they were triumphant in 1979. And this is July 19, 1979. This is the plaza, now called the Plaza of the Revolution. It's in front of the old cathedral in Managua. This cathedral was partially destroyed in 1972. There was a major earthquake, 10,000 people died, the city was devastated, and it had also been destroyed in 1931 and the 1880s. So if you do the math, you're about due for a big quake. But anyway, this day was a great day, July 19th. You can see the people celebrating, all climbed up into the cathedral there. I've been up in here back in '88, used to be able to get up in there. Wisely, they have it fenced off now because it is partly falling down. So, 1979, the revolution is victorious. The Sandinista Liberation Front takes control of the government. A new constitution is approved. We have democratic elections. Daniel Ortega, the leader of the Sandinistas, is elected president. They hope, it's a hopeful situation in the country for a little while, but the United States started working against the government pretty much right away. By the time Ronald Reagan was inaugurated in January of 1981, it was pretty much assured that they were in for a very hard time. Ronald Reagan's administration started organizing a terrorist war against the government and people of Nicaragua, which we know as the Contra War. Contra means contra-revolutionary. And that war went on until 1990. There was a presidential election in 1990, which all the polling showed that Daniel Ortega would win. I was down there observing the election unexpectedly to everyone. He lost the election to a conservative coalition led by the elected Chamorro. And that started 16 years of neoliberal rule where Nicaraguans became more impoverished. Healthcare was re-privatized. People had to pay fees to go to school, so hundreds of thousands of kids didn't go to school at all. Anyway, that's just to bring us up to where we are now, and Abra can tell you about this.
So currently, Nicaragua, fortunately, is a very peaceful country. So keep that history in mind that we just learned about, but we're moving on to more pleasant things now. This is the city of Esteli, which you mentioned. We spent much of our time there. We have friends there who would stay with in the past, and so we're kind of partial to this city. But here's a view from the hill, kind of overlooking the city. You can see the main cathedral down there, that white building with the two spires. And then over here, that's myself, my friend Alyssa, who was on the trip with us, and then one of the children from the household that we were staying with. And it's a very hilly area. We're out of the string of volcanoes that we talked about. So the mountains around there aren't volcanic, but there are lots of little mountain ranges, and it's not flat. It's a very, very pretty area. And here's that church that we saw from the hill. This is the home of the family that we stayed with, the Quintero family. As you can see, it was a simple, relatively simple home by our standards, definitely modest, made out of brick and cinder block. No screens in the windows, they're just open. The kitchen was outdoors with just a roof over it. The sink and all that was outdoors, and they had no indoor plumbing. They had a latrine in the backyard. So by our standards, very modest, but it worked. So here's Alfredo Quinteros, the head of the household here, and this was his 69th birthday, and that's his birthday wine. So there's I am and Alyssa, and then off to the right, if you can see her there in the black dress, is Juanita, Alfredo's wife. And then the kids in the front are 3 of their grandchildren that live there with them. It's one of the typical Latin American extended family in one household situation. We have Alfredo and Juanita, and their 3 adult children live with them, Carlos, Ileana, and Indira. And Ileana has 4 children who stay in the household with them. Camilo, who is 11, I believe. Krista is 8. That's the girl in the picture. And then Amaru in the blue, he is 4, and Farouk is 2. And then these are some friends of the family who are just there celebrating their birthday, but it's a very full household. So here's this sink area, and they wash all their dishes there, as well as washing their clothing there. They do all their laundry by hand. That's a very typical style of sink for a household to have, is to kind of cement sink with a basin to hold water, and then a washboard surface. And so here I am, washing some clothes there. And there's the shower, which was right next to it. Just some black plastic sheeting hung up for privacy, a little roof over top, and there's the shower head, and that's that. So here's, they do all their cooking for the household. Well, most of their cooking. They have a microwave inside, but mostly they use a fire out in their kitchen to do their cooking. And here, tortilla is cooking for breakfast. But Juanita also, baked cakes over the open fire and all kinds of things. So this is where they do most of their cooking. And here Juanita is splitting some firewood. And this family, the Quinteros, have always been very active in their community as far as politics and social organizations and all that. And right now their home is kind of the base for a group of women in the neighborhood that they're business owners, and it's a loan organization, a cooperative, and the women get financial help, and so they meet on a regular basis. And so these are the women of the group that meet in their house. Do you have a question?
Excuse me, I sometimes don't hear about. How did you become friends with this family?
My first trip to Nicaragua about 4 years ago, we somehow came in contact with a man from the U.S. who was married to a Nicaraguan woman, and he said, well, if you're traveling through Esteli, you should stop and visit my wife, who's down there right now, and our family down there, her family. And so that's how we got put in touch with these people. That woman is not currently living in the household. She was at the time we were down there, but so he's married to Daisy, which is another one of Alfredo and Juanita's children. And then Daisy and this man had a daughter, Barbara, who was also living there. So it was an even bigger household last time we were there. But they lived in Bend, Oregon then for the last couple of years, and now they're back in Nicaragua and are building a home for themselves in the nearby countryside. So that's how we met. That's how we met with them. So we went down there and stayed with them for about a week on our first trip down there. And
well, what happened was we had a whole lot of automotive difficulty with our vehicle, and so we had to stay there. They helped us out a whole bunch. Basically, took us in and treated us like family. And basically, that's the relationship we have with them.
So, this is also right there in front of the Quinteros' home. This woman one day had this table set up, and she was distributing these booklets. And so we took a look and kind of asked her about them, and we did get a few copies of them here, so if you would like to look at them afterwards, you're welcome to. But this is part of a government program, kind of an educational campaign about caring for children and the well-being of children. It's called Amor para los más chiquitos, Love for the Littlest. And this is the President Daniel Ortega and his wife Rosario Murillo, and some kids. It's a guidebook on caring for young children from birth to 6 years of age, and they've got recommendations, checklists of is your child developing properly, at the age of 3 months or whatever, can they follow an object with their eyes, and if not, if they're not developing properly, then take them to visit a doctor picked out, and simple kinds of toys and things that you can make just from household items to stimulate your child to play and be interactive and things like that. But that's one of the programs that the government is pushing right now. And so this woman had this sign-up sheet of parents in the neighborhood that wanted to be involved in the program, and she was distributing these books, and it's free.
But they actually do like home visits. You get involved in the project, and people actually come to the home, work with the family. Many people in Nicaragua are very, very poor. One of the things that the government and the social programs do is to take the stigma out of being poor. The position is, you didn't make your poverty, you're a victim of your poverty. Even though you were poor, there's all kinds of things you can do to help and enrich your children's life. So they've actually done hundreds of thousands of home visits, and it's also part of the movement by the government to strengthen families. One of the very biggest problems in Nicaragua is single mothers, single mother heads of household. Yes.
Speaking of books, did you happen to learn anything about the history books that they're using in the schools, especially the Sandinista revolution? How do they treat the United States in there?
I have not seen any such books. What I do know about that is that during the 16 years of conservative rule, that neoliberal rule that was ended 5 years ago, by the way. So 5 years ago, Daniel Ortega, the Sandinista leader, finally agreed. He'd been cheated out of the election at least once in the last 16 years. Carter said to him after one election, yeah, you got cheated out of this election. Either you accept the results or you're going to have a civil war. And he just basically took it and bided his time. But he rather brilliantly actually split the opposition. And then in a three-man race, he won with less than 39% of the vote. That was 5 years ago in November, but 5 years before. Somehow I lost my train of thought. What was your question again?
Well,
the history. Okay.
How do the grade school children learn history, especially, of course, the interference of the superpower in Nicaragua, and especially in 79, after 81?
I haven't seen the books. I haven't seen the books, and you've got to remember, books being widely available to children, which they are becoming, is kind of new. I mean, the government is now providing textbooks, and we'll talk a little bit more about education farther in the program. But what I do know from being in the schools, talking to teachers, seeing the bulletin boards and stuff, and then reading about the situation, is that during those 16 years, kids were not taught a whole lot about their history. They didn't teach them about Sandino. They didn't teach them about the resistance, about the revolution. Now they are being taught, and which is one reason you'll see later in the program that young people are exhibiting a real sense of pride in their country, their history, reconnecting with their past, which I've read where people say, boy, when I grew up 10, 15 years ago, they didn't tell me anything about Sandino. I didn't even know about this stuff. So there are changes being made. As far as the history of U.S. intervention, yes, people who are conscious, literate, educated, and in the schools now, you'll see on bulletin boards. In November, it is kind of like History Month for them, and there'll be lists of the important national events, and certainly the struggle against William Walker, the filibuster, the assassination of the dictatorship, the struggle of Sandino against the U.S. occupation. All those things kids are definitely being taught about now. But at the same time, I'd like to say that Don Ortega, the president, who he's like encyclopedic on the history, he'll be giving a speech, say, oh, it's November, on the 12th of this month, such and such happened. On the 13th, blah, blah, blah. On the 14th, on the 20th is when, Sandino did. I mean, really encyclopedic. He's always referring to history, putting things into a historical context, and he does always talk about the history of Yankee imperialism in the U.S., but at the same time, he always makes it clear that it is the policies of the government of the United States, and that they have no argument with the American people and want to be friends with the American people. So try to make that very clear. But just to finish up about this book, so they hundreds of thousands of home visits, and it's really part of the thing, really, from even before birth. They'll say, and we know this is true, talk to your baby, sing to your baby. Once your baby is born, handle your baby. Fathers, touch your baby, play with your baby, bond with your baby. They have a huge problem of fathers deserting families and women raising children on their own. I mean, I would say socially that is perhaps the greatest problem that they have. Because probably the hardest thing in the world is to be a poor woman raising a family.
So here we are. This is one of the first days that we were there. We went to the market to pick up some fresh fruit. And here, Camilo in the blue jacket has, if you can see that big yellow fruit poking out of the bag, that's a big old papaya that he's got there. As you can see, we've all got raincoats and rubber boots on. It was raining. It rained pretty much all day, all night for the first several days we were there, and I've been doing that for a week before we got there. And so Esteli, along with many other parts of the country, had a lot of problems with flooding. Two or three of the smaller bridges in town were completely washed over, and a lot of families lost their homes. We did visit a shelter while we were there for families who had lost their homes. Do you want to go back to that picture? So here's kind of outside of a market scene, an interesting photo. Some fruit
May I have your attention, please? The library will be closing in 15 minutes.
ready to be loaded up and taken off to market. So these are bananas, bunches of green bananas, and then behind those is piles of oranges.
In the room where I stayed, usually the family would have one or two of these big bunches of green bananas with a burlap bag over them, and they'll, as they ripen it from the top down, the kids would just come in and grab some.
And Alfredo, the head of the household here, in the past he's been active, real active in politics. He himself was Sandinista in the army during the revolution. Now he is a music teacher. He works on projects to preserve Nicaraguan folk music. And he plays the recorder, guitar, mandolin, and he teaches these instruments and traditional Nicaraguan folk songs to children in Esteli. So here's a class that he's
He
teaching.
also plays accordion and various other instruments. He's actually a fairly well-known.
He seems to be a very, very well-known folk musician. It seemed like everywhere we went in the country, we run into somebody who knew Alfredo Quintero. So here's the small river that runs through Esteli, and as you can see, it's pretty raging in this photograph. It's usually...
It had been much higher. It was a serious flood.
So there's one of the bridges that was washed over. Although there were lots of problems with all the rain, the people that we talked to seemed very happy with the government response for flood relief, disaster relief. While we were there, we visited a place downtown, the recreation center, the Centro Recreativo, was full of people packaging up food to be distributed to folks who had lost their homes. And a lot of these people are volunteers, a lot of them are city employees. But so these are all sacks full of corn here mostly, but each family was getting a woven plastic sack filled with some dried corn. They were getting dried split peas, a bag of cereal grain flour, rice, beans, cooking oil, and then families with small children were getting powdered milk. So we were helping package up these bags, and it was...
Here's that room.
It was hard work throwing those sacks
There's
around.
special effects.
Yes. So here we are taking a break after working for a couple hours doing that. We just went down to see what was going on, and then while we were there, figured we might as well offer to help out.
We had to work in two afternoons down there. I just read an article in the last couple of weeks. Some of this food came from the World Food Organization. And the head of that organization, a woman from Chicago, just visited Nicaragua. And I was reading an interview with her, and she said that when they invest resources in Nicaragua, they know they're going to be used well. And she said beyond that, Nicaragua is the ideal example because not only does food get to the people, at the same time the government is actually teaching and empowering the people to become productive so they can feed themselves. So the World Food Organization doesn't have to come back again. So it's just one of the many areas where this little poor country, by the way, I forgot to mention to you that Nicaragua is generally considered to be the second poorest country in the hemisphere after Haiti. We're talking about a very, very poor country. And she's saying this is a country that is performing in an exemplary fashion in respect to food. And the production of food, distribution of food, countering subnutrition and malnutrition, no